protecting lives, and we all have a duty to follow that advice.
Robinson.
The Home Secretary is well aware that the emergency legislation being brought forward this afternoon provides quite extraordinary but important measures for immigration officials and extends the power of detention. Does she not also understand that without some adequate proactive screening, that power will be rendered useless, and will she keep open the option of providing a better regimen of screening at our airports and seaports?
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course, we're working with the Department of Transport as well and across government on the issue of screening. But I think it's important, Mr. Speaker, for the benefit of the House, to recognise that where there is proper evidence, scientific evidence, we are absolutely following that. But all of this will also be under review as things change, as more evidence from the Chief Medical Officer transpires. Of course, this is what we're doing across government day in, day out.
Sally-Anne Hart.
Speaker, in times of extreme crisis which this country is facing, the vast majority of people will pull and are pulling together in the spirit of community and solidarity. Unfortunately, there will always be those who will exploit or take advantage of vulnerability and weakness. So what measures is my right honourable friend taken to ensure that the British people, our streets and our communities remain as safe as ever?
Yeah. Well, my right honourable friend raises a very important and essential question about the safety and security of the public and our communities at this particular time. I think, Mr. Speaker, it's fair to say that we have seen incredible resilience from the British public across all constituencies and our country right now. People are behaving in a very generous and community-minded way. Of course, that helps, and that's what we want to see. But at the same time, working with our police, our local authority, our local resilience forums, we are seeing organisations and individuals come together, and we want to continue to encourage that.
Chris Elmore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the weekend, I was horrified to receive calls from constituents telling me that some pub landlords were trying to let customers come in through the rear entrances of their pubs, leading my local authority after sending licensing officers to ask them to leave the pubs. Can the Home Secretary set out what punishment will be given to these pub landlords if they continue to flout the law and break these licensing conditions set out by the Prime Minister?
Well, in simple, Mr. Speaker, there are fines that will be put in place, but also for licensed premises, they run the risk of losing their licences and their livelihoods.
Mark Pritchard.
Speaker, the Home Secretary will know that COVID-19 has already had an impact on police numbers on the front line and in back office support. Can I ask her what discussions she's had or might have or consider having with the Foreign Office about those key workers, including police officers, nurses, support staff, who are currently stranded in different parts of the world, getting them back as a priority?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On police officers in particular, our numbers with frontline staff are proving to be very resilient. But my right honourable friend has made a very important point around those that are abroad and how we are repatriating them back to our country to get them back into the frontline services. That work is taking place across government, but with the Foreign Office specifically. And Border Force are now tasked with joining up with the Foreign Office to make sure that happens.
David Linden.
Before leaving their country of origin, many of my asylum-seeking constituents are doctors or nurses and very skilled at those jobs. So given that there are such a shortage of nurses and doctors at the moment, will the government look at lifting the ban on asylum seekers to work to help take part in this national effort?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've already indicated to the House that there are many measures that are currently under review, and we're working at pace across government to look at some of the changes that we will be bringing in.
Bob Blackman.
Speaker, over the weekend I was alerted to the fact that a number of religious workers, students and business people have visas that are expiring very shortly and they're not able to return to India. What advice does my right honourable friend have for those people in that category?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We will be announcing changes that we will be bringing in very soon on this, and I will not just write to the honourable gentleman, but I'll write to all colleagues about the way in which we will be bringing in extensions and bringing that extension in very soon.
Mr. Speaker, the coronavirus is driving many aspects of our daily lives online. Hopefully that will help bring us together, but it will also undoubtedly attract the criminal elements for new crimes, and particularly all the vulnerable people going online. So what additional capacity is she ensuring in the police forces to patrol the online streets and keep us safe at this time?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady raises an extremely important point, and while we might see other forms of crime fall because of the lack of activity in the street, we are well aware and sensitive to the fact that fraud may emerge. I have seen over the weekend some reports in the media of unscrupulous individuals exploiting particularly elderly and vulnerable citizens, and certainly when we've been discussing these matters with police leaders on our regular calls, they are aware of that issue and are thinking more about how they could redirect resources towards that if it becomes systemic.
David Davis.
We probably have over 500,000 undocumented migrants in this country, people who, if they fall ill with coronavirus, may be afraid to declare themselves to the health authorities for fear of deportation. The Irish government, who have the same issue in Ireland, have firewalled NHS or their National Health Service data from other parts of government. I don't know whether this is the right answer, but will my right honourable friend look at this issue and find a similar resolution?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The point's well made, and we will certainly look at it. And I would say no one should fear accessing medical advice from our superb NHS due to an immigration reason.
Aaron Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Concerns have been raised in Croydon, and I've seen it elsewhere, that religious organisations are not adhering to the new guidance about having their services or not. And indeed, I've seen some people seeing it as an act of faith that you're bold enough to go and to your religious service. What more can we do, both in terms of enforcement but also communication, to make sure people are doing what they should?
The Honourable Lady is quite right, and I received reports just this morning that there are particular communities in London in particular who aren't observing the rules, and we'll be talking to MHCLG colleagues this afternoon about what they can do to draw people together to create better observance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I just thank you for raising the death of PC Keith Palmer, who tragically died 3 years ago. The pressures on the Home Office are only likely to increase. We've seen 20,000 armed forces mobilised, many of them which will probably provide military assistance to the police. In the event of a lockdown, could the Home Secretary say what role the armed forces might play?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable General is quite right to raise the capacity and capability of our military, which is second to none. And where we can, we will draw upon it. He will know that this is a country that has a proud tradition of a strong division between the civil and the military, and we wish to maintain that. However, our armed forces colleagues do have superb expertise in logistics in particular, and in planning and construction, which we aim to use to the fullest extent.
Order, order. I wish to make a statement which relates to parliamentary services and aspects of the Chamber and other parliamentary business. I ask our honourable members bear with me, as this is longer than I would like. Chamber attendance. Parliament as a whole continues to follow the latest government advice relating to COVID-19, including advising members and staff to work remotely where possible, and limiting all but essential access to the parliamentary estate. I remind members and those watching our proceedings that steps have been taken to preserve social distancing in the chamber. As a result, attendance will be more limited than usual, but that does not curtail the commitment of honourable members to fulfil their parliamentary duties. Video conferencing. We recognise the need to improve our video conferencing facilities to enable those who are working remotely to engage in committee proceedings. Regarding evidence sessions, these facilities are currently limited, not at least because the management of these sessions requires expert operators to produce audio-visual output of a suitable quality for broadcast use and Hansard transcription purposes. The teams who make such arrangements work are currently under, and I do stress, under significant strain because of staff absences. Further work in this area will be taken forward as a matter of priority over the Easter recess. Once the current situation is settled, I will commission a review to ensure we can develop systems to ensure we are ready and able to be more agile in the future. Catering. Some members and key parliamentary staff are still required to work on the estate to enable the House to continue to fulfil its important constitutional role. And as a workplace, it's important they continue to have access to adequate canteen facilities. The number of venues has been closed, but in those that remain open, we are employing a range of measures to increase social distancing, while encouraging diners to use takeaway options where possible. The following outlets remain open: tea room, terrace cafeteria, debate, dispatch box. The members' smoking room remains open, but there is no service. I can confirm that from today, the sale of alcohol in the House of Commons catering venues has been suspended until further notice. I actually took that decision on Friday evening. All of these measures will be kept under constant review. Divisions. If divisions take place from today onwards until further notice, the arrangements will be modified to allow for social distancing. The entry of members will be staggered, with entry at separate times for 3 alphabetical groups. Members will be able to record their names at any of the desks. A division may take between 30 to 40 minutes to conduct it this way. Further details will be communicated via the whips and announced again if a division takes place. I just want to ensure that members all feel satisfied that we are, and all the staff are trying to do their best. I understand the wish for honourable members, particularly those not able to attend the chamber, to fulfil their duty to hold the government to account. However, I urge honourable members to think twice before tabling parliamentary questions. In particular, they may want to think about the impact of such questions on government officials who are working incredibly hard to respond to the current crisis. I've just got to say, if they are desperate questions, I understand, but multiple questions is absolutely blocking up staff members in this House, but actually government departments who need to be carrying on their duties. So please think twice. When a member puts 60 questions down, that is not helpful to anybody or this country. I should also mention that names added to early day motions which are not submitted electronically are not being processed. I am sure all honourable members will understand that in these exceptional circumstances, some changes to procedural services have proved necessary, and further changes may be needed. Conclusion. Finally, I want to again express my thanks to members and staff across the Parliament for their hard work in enabling that this House continues to function, and for efforts in limiting the spread of coronavirus amongst our community. I've got to say, with some absolute heroes in this House, who I want to thank on behalf of all of us. Thank you. We now come to a ministerial statement. I now call on the Lord President of the Council, the Leader of the House of Commons, to make the business statement. Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Mr. Speaker, I should like to make a short business statement. Further to my announcement to the House last Thursday, the first item of business tomorrow will now be consideration of a business of the House motion, followed by all stages of the Contingencies Fund Bill. This will be followed by committee and remaining stages of the Windrush Compensation Scheme Expenditure Bill, followed by a motion relating to appointments to the Parliamentary Works Sponsor Body. The last item of business will be a general debate on the situation in Yemen, as determined by the Backbench Business Committee. The business for the rest of this week remains unchanged.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank you for remembering PC Keith Palmer in your earlier statement. Can I thank the Leader of the House for the business statement. We agree that the Contingencies Fund Bill should be accommodated in this new change of business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful for the support of the Right Honourable Lady, and our hearts continue to go out to the family of PC Keith Palmer. It was a great sadness that afflicted them and the whole House 3 years ago.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. First of all, can I say I welcome your statement and the steps you've set out to enable this House to continue to do its democratic role, but in a way that is safe and consistent with the advice the government has set out and is expecting our constituents to follow. Can I ask in that spirit to ask the Leader, if he's not able to update us today, to think about what further steps that can be agreed between Mr. Speaker and usual channels to enable this House to properly hold the government to account over what may be a considerable period of time when we're dealing with this virus, but in a way that is consistent with the firm, important advice we're giving to the rest of the general public.
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend raises a point that is being considered by the government and will be discussed with the opposition and other opposition parties. We will need to legislate and we will need to ensure that the government is held to account, but we may well have to do it in ways that are different from those we have used previously. It is very encouraging to see that honourable and right honourable members seem to be sitting at least 6 feet away from each other in the chamber, and I would encourage that even on my own front bench, which is, seems to be observing the suitable gaps at this moment, as does the opposition front bench.
Patrick Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're happy to support the government in its efforts to get the contingency fund bill so that it can make the expenditure needed to get the country through this crisis. And we welcome, Mr. Speaker, the announcements you've just made, particularly around social divisions, should we find, and perhaps we won't, but should we find that divisions are necessary. But it is continuing to put pressure on the continuing business of the House, continues to put pressure on staff, pressure on members. Can the Leader say what consideration is being given to bring recess forward to the end of this week? Because the reality is that any of us that return to our constituencies from London, the epicentre of the virus, are going to have to self-isolate. It would be inappropriate for us to go into our communities and therefore impossible for us to get back for sittings next week. So can the Leader please take that into consideration?
Yes, absolutely. I can assure the honourable gentleman that that is being considered. I would say to the House that pairing has been very widespread for this week to ensure that honourable and right honourable members who don't need to be here are not here. We obviously need to ensure that the emergency legislation is successfully passed this week, and that depends on the other place as well as here, and then the receipt of royal assent, but we will have other legislation to do in due course. But whether the toilets rate relief bill and the general debate before the adjournment is a central business that we all need to come back for is something that is debatable.
Greg Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When the Leader speaks at Cabinet tomorrow, will he convey appreciation to the Chancellor of the Exchequer for the package of measures to support workers that he announced on Friday? He may only have been Chancellor for a few weeks, but it may be that he has saved more jobs than any of his predecessors. But will he ask him urgently to come back to this House, I know he's working very hard on that, on a comparable package for the self-employed, whose businesses are crucial to every constituency in this country and indeed to the nation?
Mr. Speaker, I will do better than my right honourable friend asks for. I will ensure the next extract of Hansard recording the thanks of my right honourable friend are sent to the Chancellor, and his proposals have received widespread support across the country in the House. His point on the self-employed is very well made, and I will ensure that is also passed on.
Kevin Jones.
Well, can I also add my welcome to the support that was given last week to those in employment? But there's real anxiety out there amongst self-employed. Bill Croney, for example, one of my constituents, runs an event catering business, contacted me this morning. These people have got no money coming in, and I think people need to realise that. The government